Buenas, bienvenidos a este vídeo de unplandivino.net. Vamos a ver un taller sobre el miedo del 2009, donde están muy contentos con la... ¿Cómo se dice? El centro donde se reúnen y que les han prestado, que les han... Estamos con Claudia y Ana Pilar. ¿Qué tal, Ana Pilar, de Argentina?
Hola, muy buenos días. Bien.
También, estamos bien.
Estamos bien. Estoy viva.
Por lo menos.
Tomando mayores conciencias, no sé cómo decirlo.
Sí, disfrutando de los dolores, por lo menos.
Sí, esa paradoja. Celebrando que me duele.
Paradoja. Celebrando, sí, que siento que me duele. Encontrando el significado, no sé.
Sí. Pues hemos visto anteriormente sobre la ira, ¿verdad? Hace nada. Y volveremos al tema del enfado, de la ira. Pero vamos a pasar por el miedo y ya volvemos en otra semana con ese recordatorio tan importante, el taller del enfado, que aquí va a salir un poco. Y entonces, a lo mejor lo dividimos en 2 horas y quería alertar de que la segunda es súper práctica, la segunda de este taller del miedo, y por si acaso la primera echa para atrás, como solemos decir, en plan. Porque, bueno, en la primera parece que a veces no dice nada nuevo, etcétera, aunque, bueno, hay cosas muy interesantes en todas partes. Y, bueno, también hay un problema aquí, que es, bueno, el taller se llama Revisar el miedo, porque habían hecho un taller que casi no se grabó bien, pero contiene la misma cosa, más o menos, en el 2008. Y ahí se llamaba El miedo es tu amigo, que de ese podemos ver algún fragmento quizá cuando lo vayamos completando. Entonces son cosas que en realidad ya he dicho en otras partes en ese del 2008, y aquí están muy contentos porque ya tienen nuevo equipo de grabación, se oye mucho mejor, el sitio es mucho mejor, más grande, etcétera.
Se ve en Jesús
Sí,
eso, su expresión.
sí, están súper contentos. Y
Sí,
de hecho se
sí.
pasan 11 minutos del inicio haciendo anuncios, de los cuales vamos a ver salteadas algunas cosas, vamos a ver cómo empiezan y bueno, a ver, ya veréis, pongo 0, minuto 0.
How is everyone today?
Aquí les pregunta cómo están todos hoy.
How do you like your new venue?
¿Os gusta la nueva sala?
It's quite nice, eh?
Muy agradable, ¿no? Se oyen los gritos, ¿no? Se oye bien. Más o menos.
Sí, se
Sí,
escucha perfecto.
You all are attraction too, yeah? That's
Ya ha gritado una por ahí, la ley de atracción, sí, vuestra ley de atracción.
right. And so we'd like to thank the Vitellas for offering this venue to us, because it's just
Aquí les agradece a estos, que creo que ha dicho el apellido de uno de ellos,
such a lovely venue. Peter,
que es muy encantadora.
so people know Peter. Can Peter stand
Aquí
up?
les aplauden. Peter y Sela, creo que ha dicho antes y está volviendo a decir ahora. Es la foto, ahí pixelada, como se diga.
And Anna is in the kitchen, I think, somewhere.
O sea, porque han tenido que hacer un aumento.
So thanks to Anna too for all the
Y Ana está en la cocina y no sé
she's
qué.
given us to setting everything up as well.
Bueno, la cosa es que ahora se pone con los micros,
And with that one, if you just
los está repartiendo por ahí,
don't turn up.
diciendo cómo se hace todo el rollo, no sé cuántos. Se le muestra a este señor con bigote. Ah, no, este no se lo da, al bigotudo.
And the middle position is mute.
Y bla, bla, bla. Entonces vamos a ver.
Then
Así,
we'll get ourselves going.
porque no van a decir cosas.
And the treatment of the venue.
Y entonces van a tratar de cosas sobre de cuidar la sala, no fumar en ciertos sitios, etcétera, todo eso.
This morning, as a group, different people have got different jobs to do, and so what we'd like to do is have those people look after those jobs, and we all know
Vamos a pasar un poco
doing
más.
for those jobs.
Aquí simplemente cosas de logística, para limpiar no sé cuántos,
Obviously,
donde dejar zapatos o no sé qué cosas.
that you keep.
También que los niños, pues, que les detengan de hacer cosas y esas cosas. Entonces vamos a ver aquí una parte que es, aquí también hay algunos peligros en los alrededores, hay terraplenes para los niños difíciles.
Over.
Vamos a ver aquí un momento.
Just takes a little time. Our attraction to the, obviously our attraction to the treat it. There's some things I want to.
Vale, y ahora
On
saca.
the net, you can find the pageant messages for all sorts of prices and.
Hay todo tipo, dice, de posibilidades de comprar en la red los mensajes de pageant, también en formato así físico, y aquí está mostrando uno de estos formatos, un tochazo, como vemos aquí.
All of them presented in different ways. But there's a man who's edited the pageant messages into a chronological order.
Que hay este señor que los ha editado en orden cronológico.
And then made a book, which is.
Y luego hizo un libro. No sé si la muestra que tienen en internet, que creo que son todos, básicamente la web de Miller, supongo que la hizo después de esto, porque lo diría aquí, que ellos también lo han puesto en orden cronológico en la web, ¿no? Pero bueno, esto es, aquí tienen ese libro.
Now, if you ordered that book on the.
Dicen que en ese momento estaba muy caro, porque es por la cosa de la importación, no sé qué, leches y cosas, y por donde lo habían publicado y todo eso. Dicen el precio, $130, que es mucho, pero dicen de llevárselo a Australia y no sé qué, la publicación. Vamos a pasar un poco, porque aquí simplemente son cosas así que no. Pues hay un momento que me gustaría que lo viéramos más detenidamente, que es cuando hablan de una mujer que va a ofrecer un sitio de retiros, porque nos toca mucho, ¿no?, con lo que hemos acabado de ver de la ira.
Talk to you about when people were doing things by donation.
Os he hablado de cuando la gente hace las cosas por donación, por donativo.
And I know that they have a keen part of, practicing the divine love path.
Y sé que tienen ahí como un papel entusiasta a la hora de practicar los caminos del amor divino. Lo hice un poco porque el señor que ha publicado los libros, pues lo ha hecho todo en plan así, creo, el del que estaban hablando ahora también. Pero ahora van a hablar de lo mismo un poco por lo de la Carol que va a salir.
Themselves, and I'm happy to actually make some announcements about it.
Y claro, y entonces estoy a gusto haciendo algunos anuncios sobre eso, sobre gente en ese plan. Aunque bueno, lo del libro es vendiendo, claro, pero no sé, es un poco raro. Pero lo quería comentar por eso.
So the next announcement is one of those.
Porque en realidad está anunciando el siguiente anuncio, o sea, el siguiente aviso.
And many of you,
o sea, es bien a cuento del siguiente aviso, ¿no?, de lo que hemos visto antes.
Know Carol.
Muchos conocéis a Carol.
Carol, will you just stand up for a moment so you can see the colourful.
Levántate por un momento, así la podéis ver, la colorida Carol.
Carol, there's Carol.
Por el vestido, supongo.
Carol owns a property called Heaven in the Hills.
Tiene una propiedad que se llama El Cielo en las Colinas.
At Malani.
Ahí en Malani, que debe ser una localidad.
It has basically 6 cottages, I suppose you'd call them.
Que son básicamente 6 establecimientos.
Some of them are very uniquely planned and done.
Algunos muy singulares en su planificación y todo.
And in the month of February this year coming.
Y en el mes de febrero de este año que viene, o sea, del 2010 ya sería.
So in February, she wants to open up to you the ability to come up there and do emotional processing.
Quiere abrir que podáis venir a hacer algún procesamiento emocional.
Work. And she wondered how many people would actually be.
Y se pregunta cuánta gente querría.
Interested in that. Now, before you express the interest.
Pero antes de que expreséis el interés.
And there's a few little guidelines, of course.
Hay unas cuantas pautas.
Obviously, Carol has quite a number of costs associated with the property.
Porque obviamente Carol tiene un cierto número de costes asociados a la propiedad.
And that need to be covered.
Que necesitan ser cubiertos.
And so what I've recommended Carol to do is just to give
Así que lo que recomiendo a Carol que haga es
you
simplemente
the costs that are associated
que os dé los costes
as a price.
asociados como precio,
And then what you do beyond that is up
y luego lo que hagáis más allá de eso
to you and
ya depende de vosotros
your feelings of
y vuestros sentimientos
regarding gratefulness and
respecto a la gratitud, agradecer
gratitude and other emotions.
y otras emociones. Bueno, y esto es lo que quería comentar un momento con vosotras, que fijaros qué curioso, como les está mezclando, digamos que los oyentes de Miller a un proyecto diferente, que es el de Carol. Y es curioso porque quizás es como, os lo pregunto, ¿no? ¿Está como con miedo o no? Miller aquí diciendo, bueno, temo que si les llevo a mucha de esta gente no les dejen eso arrasado, le gasten todo el papel higiénico, lo que sea, lo que tengan ahí, porque será una cosa además medio formal o lo que sea, y le den algún donativo que en realidad no, pues eso. Entonces, quería comentaros cómo lo sentís. Que hablamos de miedo. Aunque no hemos visto todo el caso desarrollarse, que tampoco va a hablar mucho más de esto que acabo de decir. Pero fijaros, ¿no? Porque cuando lo haces por donativo, en realidad, si tú tienes una muy buena ley de atracción, como parece haberla tenido Miller para que pueda haber hecho esto, que yo creo que es una de las cosas más milagrosas que pasan desapercibidas en el mundo, que es que todo lo que tiene lo haya hecho solo por donación. Todo eso.
Claro, yo recuerdo haber aprendido, y justo con Ana Pilar, pues le llegué a pasar un esquema de lo que lo llamaron limpieza, que me llamó la atención justamente en otra situación, estas
Sí.
cuestiones de aclaraciones respecto a cómo, digamos, no es controlar la palabra, cómo considerar nuestro comportamiento como reflejos justamente amorosos, del amor, básicamente. Claro, nunca lo vi en esta situación con tanta, porque era como un documento que se compartía a todos, que se le hacía saber la forma que, creo haberte comentado vos, la forma amorosa que incluía, por ejemplo, cómo sostener el micrófono y cómo prestar atención a las indicaciones que se hacían. Alude incluso al principio de economía, de no estar repitiendo lo que ya se dijo, o sea, el amor incluso en prestar atención. Bueno, acá ni hablar con el uso del papel, de los recursos, de considerar que somos bastante en ese sentido desconsiderados para nosotros, o no vemos el amor en esas cosas.
Sí, claro, entonces es lo que os decía, que no sé si el miedo, o sea, porque por un lado podrías verlo como que Miller no le está dejando a Carol que ella vea su ley de atracción, porque si a lo mejor Carol quiere hacerlo por donativos, es que no lo sabemos, no sabemos toda la historia, por así llamarlo, en plan pedante. Ibas a decir, perdona, Ana Pilar.
Sí, ahora recuerdo lo que dice Clau, que compartió como que un exhaustivo detalle de lo que uno debe de tener en cuenta en estas circunstancias de encuentros así un poco gratis, como le diríamos. Y acá yo interpreto que él está habilitándola a Carol y está poniendo en palabras cosas que generalmente, esto que te digo, no tenemos en cuenta cuando podemos acceder a un lugar o a un servicio con donativos, ¿sí? No es habitual, entonces, esto que dice él, que Carol prepare, bueno, a partir de tanto, lo mínimo es un aporte de tanto como para cubrir todos los gastos. De ahí en más, eso o
Sí,
más.
Lo que no
dice
sé,
él.
pero claro, a lo que voy es que no sé lo que habrán hablado antes. Que, pues, me estoy metiendo en algo, lo que está más allá del tema, ¿no? De por qué, o sea, si Carol no sabemos cuánto lleva con estas cosas, a lo mejor no quería hacerlo nunca por donativos, tampoco Miller se lo quiere imponer y no sé qué, porque es gente que funciona con donativos, entonces Carol le ha dicho, oye, diles que yo por ahora no funciono así del todo, porque mira qué me pasa aquí, no sé cuántos, esto es una movida, no es lo mismo que otros sitios, no sé cuántos, que, o sea, me estaba simplemente por por ese tipo de cosa que hay ahí, ¿no? Y que no sabemos.
Claro. Sí, cómo fue. Y él dice que va a habilitar, pero como interpreto yo como diciéndole, bueno, Carol, voy a habilitar, pero ten en cuenta que las cosas son así. Interpreto yo también, es como vos decís. Si él lo dice, debe haber una conversación previa entre Carol y él. Por ejemplo, acá hay gente que está en las... Que solamente pide, viste, en los semáforos, eso, y te dicen, te piden billete, no moneda. Entonces, el billete es a partir de 5 pesos. Menos no, moneda de 1 peso, centavo, eso no. A partir de 5 pesos para arriba, dale lo que sea. No sé si me explico. Interpreto que es una cosa así.
Sí, pues nada, vamos a seguir entonces, para que veamos un poco completo todo lo de Carol, que aún no...
That you would have in terms of giving Carol any other funds that she might need to run the property.
Y eso, lo supletorio que está llamando aquí se está añadiendo eso, otros fondos que queráis para que pueda funcionar la propiedad, no sé qué.
But the suggestions at this point by Carol are...
Pero lo que sugiere Carol en este momento es...
that you might become prepared to do a bit of gardening as well.
Que podríais también estar dispuestos a hacer algo de jardinería, si queréis, ¿no? Les dice.
On the property. So there's sort of like different things that can be done.
Porque hay como varias cosas que se pueden hacer allí.
What she's doing is she's setting up an area where you can...
O sea, lo que está haciendo es que está montando esa zona
do some anger work.
Donde podáis hacer algún trabajo con el enfado.
So a bit of anger work with a punching bag and
con eso, con una bolsa para golpearla y todo eso.
few other things like that, setting up some different areas. And
Y está poniendo algunas zonas para eso.
for the month of February,
y para febrero,
she wants to open it to people who are wanting to process their emotions rather than...
va a abrirla para personas dispuestas a procesar sus emociones.
The problem with her doing it any other
Pero claro, con el problema que tiene con eso,
time, obviously, is she's got some...
en cualquier otro momento que no sea ese,
Some people that don't want to
es que allí tiene a gente que no quiere
do with any emotions
tratar con ninguna emoción,
coming, who don't know about the divine love
que no sabe de esto del camino del amor divino.
path, and then she's got other people coming who
Y luego tiene otra gente que sí.
do, and of course if you've got one screaming in the back
Y claro, y por supuesto que si tienes a uno por ahí gritando en el patio,
yard, then
y luego
the people
los otros están ahí,
who are not doing that get a
los que no están haciendo eso,
bit worried, right?
se preocupan un poco.
So what she wants to do is open it up for that month period
Así que lo quiere abrir por ese periodo de un mes.
and just have an idea at this point how many might be interested.
Y por eso quiere tener solo una idea de cuántos podría estar interesados. Claro, es que ella se ha ofrecido a abrirlo solo por un mes, un sitio que debe ser como en plan ahí, el cielo en las colinas, imaginaros, ¿no? Pues todo nueva era, toda la gente allí, budistas, no sé cuántos, el curso de milagros, sí, todo está bien, pero no, pero soy el ego, no soy el ego, ¿qué soy? La mente, no sé cuántos, sí, pero ay, qué duro es la vida, qué duro es el ego. Bueno, todo tipo de gentes, ¿no? Que todos hemos caído en todo tipo de historias, aunque a veces, a ver, muchos de los materiales no están en realidad enfocados para que no hiciéramos procesamiento emocional, pero al final todos acabamos entrampados en esto y entonces ella va a abrirlo con un mes solo. Claro, por eso es el que les pone en atención, oye, mira, ¿dónde vais? O sea, que no es un sitio que, ala, venga, viva el amor divino y esta mujer ya funciona siempre. Claro, es por esto, ¿no?
Sí, para mí eso, bueno, eso lo experimento a mínima escala, muy mínima escala, en las conversaciones o en los encuentros sería la palabra, más que en conversaciones, en las que no hay una conciencia, si se quiere, ni hablar del amor divino, ni siquiera quizás del amor natural. Entonces, sí, representa como una necesidad de enmarcar la práctica o la actividad o todo lo que se haga, todo lo que se hable incluso.
Sí, pero me refiero para contextualizar el tema del dinero, lo que estamos hablando. No lo digo por el tema del amor divino natural, no digo por todo el tema de caro, el dinero, el retiro, ¿no? que se están montando solo por un mes, claro, están de prueba allí. Sí, pero vamos, que no pasa, o sea, no importa. Solo ya más o menos ha acabado este tema. O sea que quería explicar solo por eso. Ahora lo vemos.
In that process over the course of that month. Remembering there is 6 different places to stay there, and some of those places have quite a number of beds. So you could,
Está hablando de eso, de que en esos 6 casas que hay, pues hay bastantes camas en algunas.
Even a family and things like that could stay as well.
Que también puede ser para una familia.
But to come with that motive of just dealing with your...
Pero es para ir con ese motivo de simplemente tratar con vuestras emociones.
Stuff. And many of you are living in the city
y les pregunta, ¿muchos vivís en la ciudad y encontráis difícil o lo que sea, encontráis difícil en alguna parte poder gritar o lo que sea,
or get involved in some anger,
o involucraros en un poco de enojo
or fear,
o de miedo?
And so it'd be an ideal opportunity for
sería una oportunidad ideal para vosotros.
So perhaps if we could, I'll give you an hour or a couple of hours to jump.
Entonces ahora les va a dejar un rato para que piensen y ya.
On that one. I feel it's quite a good idea.
Vale, pues ya va a empezar el tema. Así que nada, dispuestas para empezar esta primera hora por lo menos y luego vemos. Y que ya está aquí preparado todo.
Ok.
Bien.
Things happening, so we'll see what happens there. Now, how many of you never been to one of these seminars before? Can I just have an idea? Yeah, just a few of you, all right? Normally I talk about divine love, divine truth, things like God, the universe, and all the secrets of the universe, laws, and all these different things. So that's what you would normally get. Today is going to be a little bit different. All right? So I just wanted to warn all those people who are new, don't you go judging today by, by what normally would happen. Because today I want to talk about fear. And I've talked about fear before, quite a number of occasions actually, but today I want to focus on some really practical things about fear in order to help you get into your fear. Now, most people on the New Age path or these other paths of progressions, they're all trying to get you out of their fear, out of your fear, right? And I'm saying to you, actually, that doesn't deal with your fear. All it does is connect you intellectually into suppressing your fears, and then you finish up carrying your fears around you wherever you go, unfortunately. But what we want to do instead of that, and particularly if you want to receive and continue receiving divine love, you're going to need to work through your fears. Now, many of you have fears about different things, right? Some of you have fears about coming world changes. Some of you have fears along those lines. And so some of you who have fears about it are so involved in finding all about it and finding all the interesting things about it and thinking about it all the time, right? And then others of you who have those same fears do exactly the opposite, you know, they bury their head in the sand. No, it's not happening. It's not happening where I am, at least. And we do the opposite to that. But either way, it's fear still that's governing our interaction with that. And fear generates all sorts of problems, which I want to talk about today. Some of us may have fear of spirit interactions. So we often take two sides to that story as well. We get involved in finding everything about spirits. We surround ourselves every day with the white light and the way we go on that path, and we just protect ourselves. Or we go down exactly the opposite path, which is, oh no, there's no such thing as spirits. I don't believe in spirits. And we do the opposite thing and to try and stay away from those fears. Some of us have fears about personal harm, like violence towards oneself that we get to process. And so we avoid all this situations that look like anything like that there might be a potential of violence towards ourselves. And at the extreme, we actually finish up avoiding pretty much every place, because every place there's people is potentially going to be violent towards oneself, maybe. And so we avoid those places, and eventually we become so fixated on the actual feelings that we're avoiding that we finish up within ourselves coming to the point where we believe that we don't have fear at all. But in reality, our whole life is being governed by fear. So that's part of the problem. Then many of us have problems like multi-generational fears that have been passed down from generation to generation. So let's say your mother had been raped, right? And then sometime after the rape gave birth to you. So in other words, there was this multi-generational emotion in her that she may not have dealt with that she then passed down to yourself. Then you'll have fears about rape or abuse inside of yourself that you won't necessarily understand and where they came from even, but they'll be there. And we need to be able to release them. We need to be able to let go of them somehow. How do you let go of that? Like, that's such a difficult thing to even consider letting go of. Or some of you have come from parents who were in the Second World War, all right? And some of you may have even been very closely associated in your childhood to that. And so what happens there? There was lots of violence and lots of terrible things occurring, terrible atrocities occurring, and those emotions got reflected and imposed upon your soul. And what do you do with those? How do you let go of those? Because in the end, if we want to come to God and actually connect to God in this one-on-one relationship that we've been talking about, what we're going to have to do is get to the point where all of our fears are gone. Every single fear you have will be gone. So you know how you're afraid of snakes, and afraid of spiders, afraid of violence, and afraid of angry people, and afraid, all those fears, they'll all be gone. Afraid of rape, afraid of war, afraid of murder, afraid, all those fears, they'll all be gone, right? When you're at one with God. Won't that be beautiful? It's like, we won't even know ourselves in that state, right? Because most of us are still living by our fears. So that's the subject that I'd like to discuss with you today. And tomorrow what I'm going to do is spend a lot of time trying purposefully to trigger.
Aquí, el punto es aquí, con perdón.
Your fears. So if you're brave enough to come along tomorrow as well, there are going to be different things that I present to you, and hopefully some of it might be visual as well, that I present to you about different fears that you have. And it will be for the purpose of directly starting to confront some of these fears emotionally. So the reason why I wanted to do in that way is because today I wanted to present to you some practical things you can do to work your way through your fear. And then tomorrow, I want to scare the living daylights out of you and see what happens and see whether you put into practice the things that we learned today or not. No, I clear out Monday. You're all on your own after that. But remember, that's one of the fears that we'll address. So actually, whether you are on your own or not, because that's part of it. Now, during the sessions today, feel free to ask questions. But you'll need to put up your hands. We've got 2 roving mics to ask those questions.
Ahora está hablando de los micrófonos para preguntar y todo eso.
So that we can record them. And before I begin as well, though, on the subject, is I'd like to talk a little about my own emotions this week, because I'm in a fairly disconnected state today, if you haven't already noticed. During the week, what's been coming up with me is lots of what you call soulmate grief, I suppose, and lots of grief coming up in me about that subject. And during the week, I realised I had 2 spirits attached to me as well who are in a deep grief, male spirits who are in deep grief about their soulmates as well, which are heightening my soulmate grief emotions. And so I'm having to work my way through those emotions. So if I just burst out crying for some unknown reason during the presentation today, you'll know that it's a known reason related to that generally. And I'm finding with that emotion, I'm really happy about it because it's affecting so many parts of my body and has done for such a long time that I'm really happy to be starting to get into it. But it's just come up at this time when we've got this presentation. That's the way things go at times, isn't it, in your life? And so I'm trying to stay in the emotion that I'm feeling while still presenting this subject to you. So hopefully we'll see how we go with that. Now, the presentation that I do today and tomorrow, there'll be the topics for them I'm typing up at the moment, and they'll be on the internet, and they're available on the www.divinetruth.com website under seminar downloads. You'll see the PDF document as well as the MP3 from today. The PDF documents I hope to have completed by Monday, because the PDF document tomorrow is going to give you a list of movies and books that you can watch and read purposefully to trigger certain types of fears. Right? And initially we thought we'd only come up with 10 or 20, but at the moment the list's way up there and I'm still going, so I don't know when we're going to get it finished between today and Monday. But what there is a long list of different types of movies. Now, what I would like you to do, and this is just a suggestion, is for the next month, spend time confronting your fears and use the techniques that you learned today, the practical things that you learned today, to actually address those fears, to actually get into those fears and experience them emotionally. Now, whenever we talk about fear or terror, the majority of us instantly go into, why would I want to do that for? You know, what's AJ suggesting? Yeah, I am a bit crazy sometimes, isn't it? That's what it seems like. And particularly making a crazy suggestion like we're going to go into our fears rather than avoid them. You know, most people spend most of their life avoiding. So, but there are some really powerful reasons why you need to look at addressing your fears. Firstly, all of your fears are what cause your physical pain. So every tiny little bit of physical pain you ever experience in your body, or headaches or any of those, all of them are because of fears. Fears are the blocking or capping emotion. So that's what I'd like to talk about with you for a moment. I've just remembered my pens. Sorry about the whiteboard as well today.
Ahora pide disculpas por la pizarra que es más pequeña y creo que hablará de los lápices también.
There's another one, but these are not very good pens.
Dice, estos no son muy buenos. Siempre está liado con los rotuladores. ¿Os acordáis?
We ordered another one, but it hasn't arrived yet. So
que han pedido otra pizarra, pero no ha llegado.
The next time we come, there should be this great big thing.
La siguiente será esta más grande.
That the majority of you can see a bit better with. Just all of them, babe. I'll grab them. Thanks. Thanks, Dana. Got my collection in here.
Aquí tengo mi colección.
Bag of goodies.
La bolsa de golosinas.
All right, well, let's look what's happening with fear. What happens is, underneath everything, we have some causal emotion. Causal emotion is like grief, shame, sadness, those kind of emotions. Causal emotion, they were created in us when we were very, very young children, usually, right the way up through our childhood and sometimes into our teenage years. And it's all those emotions that actually generate our law of attraction. Now, even the ones that haven't been here before, have you heard of the term law of attraction? Most people have, yeah? The law of attraction is based around what's going on at you in your causal emotion. So in other words, when I feel something inside of my soul, which is all causal emotions, something related to my childhood, those particular emotions, whether I am aware of it or not, and perhaps if we can maybe just open up one of those side doors so that people can come in the side. Yeah.
Bueno, dice que abran una de esas puertas quizá para poder que entre la gente, no sé qué.
And whether I feel those causal emotions or not, they generate my law of attraction. So my whole life is governed by these causal emotions, whether I am aware those emotions exist inside of me or not. Right? This is what a lot of people call the subconscious, you know? And it's that causal emotion that generates everything. Now, on top of that, we usually have blocking emotions. These are the emotions that we were taught to use, usually via our parents, but also by our environment. We were taught to use these blocking emotions to avoid the experience of the causal emotions. Now, the biggest blocking emotions are fear-related. Your fear. I'm terrified of dealing with this emotion, and so straight away I'm now blocking the experience of that emotion. Now the fear creates all of my problems when it comes to my body. So that my body will start to close down in different areas related to the different emotions, the causal emotions that I'm not experiencing. So you see this happening as we grow older and older, different parts of our body start shutting down. So, you know, you might have been fit young when you were young, but when you're getting to 40 or 50, you start feeling, and the doctors start diagnosing, oh, they might have heart attack issues, for example. So heart problems. And a lot of these problems are so-called generational because they are passed down from parents to children through their emotional set. So here I am feeling these emotions and, or usually not feeling them, but passing them down from parent to child. And so I'm growing up now and I get into my later years and my body starts packing up. And my body's packing up because I am suppressing the actual causal emotions that if released, then my body would operate perfectly. I would have no pain, sleep fine every night, have no tablets to take, no medication to take, all of those different things. None of that would happen. But because I've got these blocking emotions, and in particular the fear, what happens is that these causal emotions never get addressed. They never get released. And so it's like carrying around lead weights with you for the rest of your life. Now, you can do that while you're fit and healthy and, you know, as you're growing up, that the longer a lead weight is carried, the harder it is to carry, right? And that applies to your body too. So there's this whole series of blocking emotions, of which fear is probably the most dominant, that cause you to suppress your causal emotion. But often what happens on top of that is we have another layer. And this other layer is the layer that is our little indicator layer, I'd like to call it sometimes. These are the denials, which are also emotions. So the denial emotions. Now, the one I would like to talk about particularly today is anger. Now, remember in previous discussions, I've always said anger includes annoyance, slight annoyance, frustration, and all those kind of things too. So we're not just talking about I'm in a rage, I'm talking about everything from rage right the way down to slight annoyance. That all I'm going to bundle together as all as anger. Now, they are denial emotions. The anger, so if we look at anger in particular, is the method we use to suppress our fear. or to deny our fear even exists. Now, one of the things I've noticed is that many of the people who have been hearing about the Divine Love Path for the last 12, 18 months or so, many of you have started to deal with some emotions, but then get stuck in this anger, right? And we're getting stuck in anger because we want to avoid our blocking emotions. Which is our fear primarily about something. And our fear is helping us get away from our causal emotions. Now, if you look at this from the point of view of changing your law of attraction. So even if you don't want to involve God in the process and all you want to do is just be happier, your happiness is directly dependent upon your causal emotion. In other words, what's happening to you day-to-day life is that your soul is attracting all of the events around you. Every single moment, your soul is continually sending out all these different signals, right? And all of these things that come to you, all of the events that happen to you are all because of your causal emotion. They're not necessarily because of your blocking emotions, and they're not necessarily because of your denial emotions. They all start at your causal emotional area. Now, blocking emotions can also create, but if you get rid of the causal emotion, you'll never have a blocking emotion to create. So if we focus on this particular part here, we can rapidly change our law of attraction so that we can be happy quite quickly. But the problem is that for the majority of us is we've got this anger first, and then there's fear, and then there's the emotion. And many of you have heard that the emotions that are the healing emotions are really grief-based emotions, right? And then on top of the grief, we've got the fear of the grief. And then on top of that, we've got the anger about the fear of the grief. And so what we're doing a lot
o enojos sobre el miedo a la pena, o acerca del miedo a la pena.
A lot of times is we're working in this level where we're angry all the time, or we're annoyed, or even slightly annoyed, or we even go one step further to all of this. And this is the place that a lot of New Age type philosophies recommend you go to. You go into denial of the denial emotion. Right? The denial emotion is anger, and you go into denial of your own anger. So you talk to a person, you're very angry. No, I'm not. Right? And you've got all this rage coming out of them. You know, you can feel it coming out of them a lot of times, right? Just being with them is uncomfortable, and then they'll say, no, I'm not angry. And why do they do that? Because they're now using the intellect to actually suppress all emotion. Right? Now, when we get into that state where we start suppressing like anger, and which is suppressing fear and so forth, that's when we're starting to get into the depressive states as well, where we start suppressing all emotion, and all depression actually is a result of our desire to suppress anger-based emotions. Does that make sense? So you've got this layer upon layer thing happening. Most people, you know, you've heard about other people talk about it with regard to onion layers, if you like, and things like that. How you think about it is up to you. What I'm trying to do today and this weekend is to address this area here, this area of blocking emotions and the area of the emotions of denial. Because what I've found myself is that if I address those areas, once I get rid of them, all of the causal emotions just pop out of me like no effort at all. If I don't address them, those causal emotions frustrate the hell out of me. Right? You notice that with your own emotional processing. You're trying to access an emotion, and my suggestion is if you're trying to access an emotion, give up on trying. Don't bother trying anymore because you've got a block. And rather than, you know, many of us know, oh, I'm sad about my mother dying, for example. Or I'm sad about my child dying when he was 2. Or I'm sad about, you know, what happened when I was in childhood abuse. I'm sad about, you know, these different events. Many of us know what we're sad about, but we can't feel the sadness. And the reason why we can't feel the sadness is because of these layers that we've got on top that need to firstly be removed. And it's those layers that prevent the emotional experience, right? So let's look at this process. I'm saying that we're at the stage now where we're no longer deciding to use our intellect anymore. Have you made that choice yet? No longer give up the intellect, just no longer decide to use the intellect. That's the place where you're no longer going to meditate yourself out of an emotion. You know what I mean by that? Like calm yourself down, you know, lay, or even go along to some kind of therapist who gets you out of the emotion by doing whatever they do. You come away feeling really good, but 3 days later you're not feeling good again and you feel like you've got to go back. So you go back and lay on the table and have the same thing done again. You go out feeling good, and then 2 days later you're not feeling good again. So you go back, and we become addicted even to the process of feeling good in that state. In the end, we need to address the cause. If we address the cause, we'll address the cause and we'll feel good all the time on that issue. We won't have to go back anywhere. Our body won't have to have the same pains in it anymore. All of those things change. So what I'm finding with my body is that if I don't deal with an issue, my body lets me know now really rapidly. And many of you are finding that too? Really rapidly, I'm getting shown to me what's going on. And the key is to listen to your body. Your body's a very good barometer of what you're denying. Right? So I go along and do some spiritual work or some emotional work, and I used to have headaches, and then I go along and do the work, and for a week or two I still have headaches, and then I don't have headaches, and then I start getting headaches again. Is the cause dealt with? No. Quite simple. Right? You find you have these like little pains in your knees, you know, like, I don't know about you, but sometimes I have them, you know, where you got a pain in the knee and all of a sudden you're working away and all of a sudden your knee sort of goes clunk or whatever it is, and from then on it starts to hurt. And this happens on a regular basis. It doesn't happen anymore for me, but it used to happen on a very regular basis. I haven't dealt with the emotion, whatever that's about. Right? There's an emotion related to that. Right? Everything is based around a soul-based denial of an emotion or the acceptance of one. In my case, at the moment, I've got terrible bowel pains. Right? So that anybody who comes out to my house knows that flatulation is the way of the game, right? And that's the way it goes, because I've got these emotions connected to this unworthy feeling that I have about myself in relation to my soulmate. Right? So that's there pretty constantly. Have I dealt with it? No, because it's still happening, right? Every now and then, what happens is, I don't know if you've noticed today, but my thumb is cracking again. Every time, and then it happens again. So I think I've dealt with emotion, and then a month later, my thumb cracks again. So I haven't dealt with the emotion. I know what it's about, but I still haven't got to the end of it, the cause of it. The body's telling me constantly. Right? That's your body's doing the same. It's just whether we notice it or not. That's the thing. So forget the intellect. The intellect's not very good. The only good thing about the intellect is it's a good way of helping you get back into the emotion. So your intellect can help you get out of your emotion, or you can use an intellect to help you get back into your emotion. It's up to you which way you use it. It's just a tool. So let's look at the denial emotions. Anger. There's only usually two reasons for anger. One is we have an expectation that's not getting met. Right? That's number one. I have an expectation in me that my environment, you guys, are not meeting. You're not treating me nice, I'm angry with you. Make sense? It's my anger, there's something inside of me. It comes from a deeper emotion within myself. No matter how you treat me, if I'm angry, there's something within myself that I need to address emotionally. Right? That's the key thing to remember there. Anger is really good emotion, and we've talked about anger a lot in the past, because anger tells you, it's your guide towards your fear. Anger tells you when you're afraid. So if you can remember that. When I am angry, I am just afraid and denying it. If you can remember that. When I am angry, and replace with angry if you want, slightly annoyed, frustrated, and all of those things that are all related to anger. When I am angry, I am just afraid, but denying it. So anger is an excellent tool to tell you when you're really scared about something. And I don't mean physically scared, I mean emotionally scared about something. Yes? So if we have a mic, if you leave your hand up, because that way.
Hey Jay, is it possible to have fear to get into anger?
Certainly. If anger can also be, remember, a causal or a blocking childhood emotion. So remember that sometimes in your childhood you had deep grief associated with constant bad treatment, right? And then that clicked into a blocking emotion, and the blocking emotion, that grief, is often anger at the childhood level. And then you could have adult fear about dealing with your anger, certainly. So that certainly does apply. But you won't have adult anger about dealing with your adult fear. Sorry, the other way around. Adult fear about dealing with your adult anger. It'll be coming from some kind of childhood.
Yeah, it feels.
Aquí podría parecer que haya un poco de lío. Tuviste una profunda pena asociada a un maltrato constante y, aunque creo que dice exactamente lo que pone aquí, la pena esa sería causal, estaría almacenada como porque no la ha terminado de sentir, pero es que tampoco hemos terminado de sentir de pequeños la emoción de bloqueo, que sería una ira, pero una ira infantil, que vimos en el taller de la ira, ¿no? Entonces vamos a retroceder un momento para repasar esto, porque es un punto lioso.
You're at the childhood level. Would you have deep or a blocking childhood emotion? Certainly. If anger can also be, remember, a causal or a blocking childhood emotion. So
aquí dice eso, que la ira también puede ser tanto emoción causal como emoción de bloqueo de la infancia. O sea, una emoción de tipo de bloqueo, pero situada en la infancia, ¿no? También de tipo causal en la infancia. Les ha quedado tan abajo, ¿no? Esa ira infantil sin sentir. A ver cómo lo dice otra vez.
Remember that sometimes in your childhood you had deep grief associated with constant bad treatment, right? And then that clicked into a blocking emotion.
Y entonces se convirtió en una emoción de bloqueo.
And the blocking emotion, that grief, is often anger.
Y la emoción que bloquea esa pena, sí dice esto tal cual parece.
Anger at the childhood level. And then you could have adult fear about dealing with your anger, certainly. So that certainly does apply. But you won't have adult anger about dealing with your adult fear. Sorry, the other way around. Adult fear about dealing with your adult anger. It'll be coming from some kind of childhood.
Yeah, it feels, I can feel it there, but it's quite frightening.
Yes. Well, you think about what happened to most people when they were little, when they got angry. What did mum and dad do then?
Shut them down.
Well, usually you got a belt, right? Corporal punishment usually was the aim of the game, generally, in that state. So what do you associate with getting angry? Pain. So obviously that association needs to be broken in order for you to work your way through that emotion. So that certainly can be the case. But remember, even if that is the case, the anger, even the childhood anger, is still the denial of the childhood grief. Does that make sense?
Entonces aquí es donde puede parecer un lío, pero bueno, son causal la ira de la infancia, aunque es una emoción de negación, pero también es tan profunda y causa nuestra ley de la atracción porque se queda ahí desde muy pronto, ¿no? Pero sigue siendo una negación de la pena de la infancia. Entonces, no importa todo este lío, como vemos, porque eso nos vamos a ir dando cuenta a nivel emocional, ¿no? ¿Queréis comentar algo ya que he parado rápidamente? Más o menos está claro.
Sí, bueno, tenemos como punto de referencia haber visto ya lo de la ley, por eso, sí, yo por lo menos no sé.
Tanto la ley de
lo de la ley de atracción
como la ira infantil, ¿verdad? El caso de Josh en el taller anterior.
Sí.
Prácticamente anterior, sí.
Coincido.
O sea, no hay lío, ¿no? Sí.
No, muy claro todo.
Más o menos, sí. Aunque sí que hay lío intrínsecamente, aunque más o menos, o sea, eso está claro, sí, pero sí que la cosa se pone, porque la pregunta de Denis es ahí a mala leche, ¿no? Es decir, ahora tengo yo miedo de la ira, ¿yo qué hago con eso? Porque si me está diciendo que la emoción del miedo está ahí en medio, que es un bloqueo, la ira la tengo por arriba, pero yo además tengo miedo a la ira, entonces, ¿qué pasa, no? Entonces, pero que ya, si vemos lo anterior y empezamos a sentir estas cosas, no hay lío, es lo que estamos viendo. Muy bien, pues.
So it still applies, what I'm saying still applies really in the end. There's these layers, and if you've got the adult layer suppressing the childhood layer, that's just an additional layer on this path, if you like. The key is to allow yourself to experience, and when you do, you'll get through them all. But it certainly can be the other way around, at the childhood level, not at the adult level. So does everyone understand what I mean by that? Yeah? So I feel a bit of uncertainty about that from someone? No? Okay, if don't have to ask questions if you don't want to. All right, so my anger, which is my denial emotion, my anger is a great tool, you know. It's a great tool. Fastest way to shut down another person, get angry with them. So we learn that at a very young age. Get angry, and we use anger in two ways. One way is because we've had some grief or pain that is over and over and over, reoccurring over and over again. Now, when we have reoccurring grief or pain, we eventually get angry. So most children have had that, when you think about it, reoccurring grief or pain. How many of you felt unloved very young age and then felt unloved most of your childhood? Over and over and over again, right? Majority of us, really. So what's happening there is the feeling of being unloved, feeling I'm unloved again, I'm unloved again. Eventually you get so hurt inside of yourself that you just get angry about it, right? Because we're not releasing the grief, and the grief is just happening over again and over again. So eventually we get angry. So that's a childhood anger-based emotion, which we often then tried to express, and then we got shut down through pain. So we got punished or whatever for expressing it, and we got shut down through pain. So now we've got the blocking emotions of our childhood anger and pain associated with our childhood anger. So that's one of the blocking emotions. Now, if you think, so now we've got the blocking emotions of our childhood anger.
Ahí tenemos las emociones bloqueantes, que son de nuestra ira de la infancia. Tenemos dolor asociado a esa ira de infancia. Aquí sería más bien relativas a esa, porque el dolor sería lo que bloquea Nuestro miedo al dolor cuando nos pegan, o lo que sea, sería lo que bloquea la ira de infancia. Pero la ira de infancia es también un bloqueo para la pena que nos acaba de relatar.
And pain associated with our childhood anger. So that's one of the blocking emotions. Now, if you think about it, what was shutting us down really, even at the childhood level, was fear of pain. Does that make sense? It's not actually fear of anger, because we were fine getting angry before we got the pain, right?
Aquí se refiere, estábamos a gusto, entre comillas, o sea, estábamos bien, no bien enojados, no muy enojados, sino estábamos bien, ahí, bueno, enfadados, antes de tener el dolor por estar enfadados. Eso, para que no quede claro eso.
It's actually the fear of pain associated with anger. That's the reason why we shut down a lot of times. Anyway, so we shut down at childhood level. We're so afraid now of the pain that now as an adult, we're protecting our pain all the time. Right? And so every time our pain gets triggered, bang, I'm into protection of my pain zone, you know. And as soon as I'm in protection of the castle, as it's often called, right? So we've got this castle of emotions and we're trying to protect them all the time. So there's our anger. Remember I said there's two reasons for anger? And just to cap them again, one is that we have an expectation that is not being fulfilled from our environment that is not being fulfilled. Now, underneath that expectation from our environment is really a feeling that you should fix something that I have inside of me. You see that? So if I get angry with you, I'm saying that you're responsible for what I'm feeling. That's really what I'm saying. And you're not responsible for what I'm feeling, but I want to make you responsible for what I'm feeling. Why would I want to do that? Because I don't want to feel it myself. Right? And instead I want to make you responsible for causing me to feel it and you responsible for fixing it. Right? So that's one reason for anger. The other obviously reason for anger, and in fact the majority of times the second one is the truth, and that is we're just afraid. We're just really afraid. But we don't want to admit to ourselves we're afraid. What happens when you admit to yourself when you're afraid when you're a little kid at school? Everybody starts picking on you and, you know what I mean? You're a weakling and you're gutless and, you know, everyone starts laughing at you and so what do? You put on this other facade. The other facade is I'm the brave Johnny, you know, and brave Johnny, he does everything that AJ wouldn't normally do. So and he's the one who looks after me in the end, really. But it's really, in the end, an avoidance of the underlying fear of total vulnerability. So let's just remove the denial emotions for a moment. So we just replace it with what we often have, which is anger. We remove the blocking emotions and replace it with what we often have, which is fear. So now we're getting down to some causal emotion and the causal emotion, let's replace it with this emotion, grief. That's what's normally locked up in us. That process, if you like, is what's going on. So if I'm finding I'm slightly annoyed, frustrated, slightly angry, intensely angry, in a rage, murderous, that is up in that bracket there, all that. If I find in this one that I'm like slightly agitated, a bit fidgety, right the way through to fearful, right the way through to terrified, that's in that bracket there. Right? And then when in this one, I'm slightly sad, just a little morose, a little bit down, right the way through to sobbing with grief, that's in that bracket there, if you like. All right. So what we want to do is address why we get into anger. And so what I'm really saying is the reason why we're getting into anger is because we're really in fear and we don't want to acknowledge it. Right? And while we're in fear, fear is the cause of all of my pain. That's what I need to remember. Also, fear is going to prevent you from ever being at one with God. When you become at one with God, you will never have fear again. I just want to read something from the Paget messages for you, written by a spirit. My friend's Andrew, his name is. He said, I am here, Andrew. I came to tell you that where love is, there can be no sin or unhappiness, and fear is not. We who live in the celestial spheres know this to be a fact, and with all the force and authority that knowledge gives, we declare this truth to you tonight. The love that casts out all fear is the divine love of the Father, and when a spirit obtains that, there exists no such thing as fear, and nothing that could create or permit fear to exist. That's a pretty definite statement, isn't it, about what love does. Now, scientists and psychologists and everyone would argue differently. What they would say to you is that, no, you actually naturally experience fear, right? So if you walk across the road and all of a sudden a car hits you, right in that particular moment, they say you will experience fear, right? Just before that moment occurs. So that's an interactional fear, if you like. And they define it, I forget what the term is, I think I've written it down here in this outline for you to read later. They define it as...
Está diciendo ahí, pienso que lo he... porque no encontraba exactamente esto que ahora va a decir, miedo realista. Y lo busca en el esbozo, en el esquema.
What they call realistic fear. Fear based on a real situation. Now, the next set of fears that they say are the fears that are the result of the original thing occurring. So let's say I got run over by a car when I was little. The next set of realistic fears are, all right, whenever I come up to a road, I'm going to be careful, right? Because the last time I came up to a road when I was little, I got run over or whatever. So from then on, I start to be careful. I start to be living in this fear, if you like. And then as an adult, I'm just afraid of crossing the road. So, you know, I never jaywalk. I always go up to the sign, and then, you know, here in Queensland where you can just walk across the road and hope everybody stops. But of course, you worry that nobody's going to. So you step out the road and you wait for them to, yeah, now I'm on, right? And so we have these fears come up. These are what are called, the psychologists would call natural fears. But what God's saying to us really is that in the end we won't have any fear at all, even those kind of fears. Why won't we? Because we'll already know what to do in every situation. So how would you be afraid if you knew what to do in every situation? You couldn't be, really, could you? If you know, oh, there's a guy in that car, he's not going to stop for me, you're not going to walk across the road. If you can feel his emotions before you even look at him, you would know whether to walk across the road in front of him or not. Can you see that? You say, oh no, he's not paying attention, I'll just wait here and let him go past and then I'll go across. So then another person, you can just, and you'll feel this in time, you'll just feel totally in synchronicity with all of your environment, and you'll be able to just walk up and walk across the road, and you know that the person behind you saw you, and you know the other person saw you, and so of course you won't have any fear at all. Does that make sense? When you're in a state where you've dealt with all the fears, you can actually start feeling all the emotions of everyone around you much more easily. And because of that, because of feeling all those emotions, you're now far more in tune with your entire environment, which means you don't finish up doing things that harm you automatically, not as a choice because of fear. It's just an automatic process. So when you get that, and when you're at one with God, you're in tune with the entire universe, really. And when you're in tune with the entire universe, you're not afraid of anything. So someone can threaten you with death, and you would not be afraid of it. Whereas if you didn't have those feelings, if you had those other feelings, causal emotions, you would be. So we can get into that state. So really what God's saying to us is, you don't need to be afraid at all. And so we go, oh, okay, I don't need to be afraid at all. Okay. So what do we do then? We start trying to not be afraid at all, right? Because that's what we're told. You know, at the end of our development, we're not going to be afraid at all. Okay, all right, I'll start acting like I'm not afraid at all. Now, that's a very fictitious place to be. Because in the end, you do have emotions inside of you. The only way to actually experience what I'm talking about in reality is to release the emotion of fear inside of you. Does everyone follow that? Because without releasing the emotion of fear still exists within you, no matter how much you intellectually try to avoid it. It's going to be within you, still creating your law of attraction, and everything around you will be happening based on that. So it's far better to experience your fear. But that's where most of us freak out. Most of us have huge problems with that. Because the very first time you experience a fear event as a causal emotion type fear, like there's a blocking emotion, a childhood blocking emotion, you will be quite terrified. You might even be on the ground and shaking and all these things happening to your body and all your body's in a cramp, you know, and anybody coming along looks at you and thinks, oh, doctor, hospital, you know, and like that's how people respond to that kind of physical expression of those emotions. So even the whole universe around you, it feels, but it's actually really people on earth around you, are actually against you fully expressing your fears. And of course, the only way to go from that, if you can't fully express your fears, the only place to go is anger. You notice how anger seems to be far more acceptable? Like, you know, how many men are in a rage and yet, you know, most of society accepts it, right? And we have all of these outlets for anger in society, you know, like sports, an outlet for anger for a lot of men. War is an outlet for anger. Isn't it? Like, you see all these outlets for anger. But how many outlets for fear do we have? Like, do you ever see people very much dealing with their fear in an emotional experience? Have you ever done it in front of somebody else, for example, yourself? Like, every time I've ever done it in front of somebody else, they have absolutely freaked out. And that's not very helpful for me getting to my causal emotion, right? And I remember the first time when I experienced it, I was 18 years of age. I was vomiting in the toilet, and all of a sudden I went through into this fear place, this fear fit things that I used to have. And I had so much fear that, like, I had these fear fits for most of my life. But they started having in an intense way when I was 18. And I was trying to open the door of the toilet to yell out to somebody, and all of my body just went into complete lockup. There's a medical term for it, but I won't bore you with all those things. And I was there. I couldn't speak. All of my face was all lined with my muscles all like clamping my jaw shut. All of my muscles in my body caused my legs to go up, and I was actually hanging by one arm off the ground in the toilet on the doorknob, which was a round doorknob, right, hanging there, not able to let go of the doorknob. And bashing my head was the only thing I could do. So I hit my head on the wall, trying to let other people know in the house that I was locked in the toilet and was in this state, right? Took about 10 minutes or so for somebody to answer. And this was straight after I had a car accident. This was about maybe 4 or 5 days after I had a car accident. So the car accident triggered all this fear. I went into this place emotionally, and I'm there hanging by this door in this terrible state of terror, hardly being able to breathe, my body all locked up, all the muscles all locked up and everything just hanging on the door. Now, it took two men to open the door and get me off the doorknob. And then once I got off the doorknob, they took me to the bed and they called the doctor, of course, right? They called the doctor and everyone's all worried. My sister was there present and she was screaming and everyone else was in a panic, and this is about my own fear and everyone else is in a panic, right? And the doctor comes along and gives me a great big shot, you know, and all of a sudden I'm out to it for quite a few hours. I think it was about 16 hours or so. Now, and that was my first terror experience, right? And nobody around me wanted to know about it. And I had a number since then. I had, in fact, up until I was around 33, I had about 8 of those experiences. And what it taught me was that people are terrified of your own terror. And so much so that when I knew, I could feel these experiences coming on after a while, after the first few times, I could recognise the symptoms of me going into this fear state. And what happened was I would tell the people, all the people around me, I'm going to go into this fear state now. This is what you're going to need to do. This is how you're going to need to treat me. I had to sort of give them a heads up, right, before they'd actually allow me to go through the experience. And eventually I got to the point when I was 33 where I started facing the terror face on, like head on. And so I had 2 of those fits a day for 3 months. Right? So eventually I got through them all. They started off, they were about 2 hours long. The best way I could liken them was, for me, it was like I was in what's that when you get cramp, you know, but cramp all through your body for 2 hours straight. Can't speak, can't do anything else, and a lot of times I passed out because I couldn't breathe properly either. I always survived them. And they, you know, the doctors did their thing, you know, the ECGs and the scans and all those different things, and found nothing, of course. And of course, because it's all emotional, it's all driven by emotions. And eventually I learned how to deal with fear. And it was an amazing thing to be able to learn how to deal with fear. Because after 3 months, I never had one of those again, ever. One of those fear fits ever again. And after that time, I was not afraid of dealing with any single emotion inside of myself. So that was the benefit of experiencing those things. It was the fear that was preventing me from actually accessing other emotions. And so I had to work through the fear first.
Vale, ¿qué os parece si lo dejamos aquí? Que ya llevamos 1 hora más o menos. Y seguimos en la siguiente tras comentar unos minutos. Y descansar 10 minutos para ir al baño, lo que sea, si queréis. Como hoy podemos a lo mejor hacer estas dos. Muy impactante esto, porque parece que estos ataques de tanto miedo no serían lo normal para las almas. Nosotros tendremos a lo mejor, si nos los permitimos, pero no tan fuertes, ¿no? No sé si estáis vivas o ya estáis acalambradas.
Ya estoy temblando. Sí.
Siento frío.
No se quería hablar, Ana.
¿Se escucha?
Sí.
Sí, por eso no quería seguir hablando yo. Sí, Ana, te escuchamos.
No, muy claro me parece, y de miedo lo que le pasó a Jota, pero está claro, uno tiene que lidiar con sus miedos.
Yo
Sí.
recuerdo en el documento de ¿Cuál es tu tesoro?, donde él habla del miedo en una parte, que contaba que quienes aquí han atravesado la tortura hasta la muerte, ¿no? Hasta el punto de ser torturados hasta morir. Y claro, yo no sé, no lo dice expresamente, pero calculo por la intensidad, como decías, Iván, de la experiencia que Jesús tiene de todo eso, y mucho en cuanto al proceso, al recuperar la memoria de toda la trayectoria completa. Eh, y a mí me pasó ayer, por ejemplo, que estaba en casa de una amiga y pude percibir que acá en Argentina, en el Chaco, estamos ya en la temporada estival, las temperaturas son altas. Y estaba hablando, justamente ella me hacía preguntas muy interesantes, estaba dispuesta a escuchar y estaba abierta. Y yo pude percibir que en un momento me empezó a temblar la barbilla cuando le hablaba. Yo no podía coordinar y no entendía qué me pasaba. Yo no sé si está relacionado quizás con muchas cuestiones mías. No es que no sé. Sé, no pude identificar la emoción, pero la asocié al miedo, porque claro, un poco de todo lo que contó al principio, todavía estamos en ese proceso, y yo personalmente hablo, en ocasiones ni siquiera identifico si es ira o es miedo, o sea, todavía no, estoy desorientada y ni siquiera puedo salir de la mente, digamos, estoy como medio en esa transición un poco. Nueva era y qué sé yo, todo el popurrí que tengo, más mi fachada, claro,
Sí,
y más el entorno.
porque fíjate, pese a que, bueno, a nosotros nos acercó, nos unió un poco el libro de la vía, ¿no? Que luego hemos visto citar y que traduje y lo tenía en la web, y luego lo quité, me enfadé un poco y realmente con razón en parte, aunque sí que tiene muchas cosas que si uno las sigue, ese libro pues a rajatabla, como preguntarte sobre los deseos, realmente abrirte a sentir que todo lo que te pasa tiene una causa dentro de ti, pero como no lo dice tan claro y fíjate, como no está este esquema y es tan brutal que tenemos que alertarnos sobre esto, que es como otro orden de magnitud, ¿no? Es como que esos libros, algunos de la nueva era, que directamente son pues de espíritus del amor natural, con más o menos arrogancia, pues hay muchos pues con más delicadeza o con más eso que te incitan a mejorar en amor, bueno, está muy bien, y a darte cuenta de tu responsabilidad, pero, pero es de una manera como que eso, o sea, es otro mundo, porque de repente aquí el contraste es tan brutal y lo dice tan claro todo, que por eso lo quería comentar así, porque como acabas de decir, que es que estamos en una fase que realmente apenas estamos empezando a darnos cuenta de emocionalmente de todos los años de negación, de negación de la negación, es decir, de negación de la ira, de miedos por esto, miedos por esto, de vivir en el miedo durante tantos años es fuerte, claro.
Sí, yo en algunas cuestiones que, sobre todo mi fachada, puso mucho énfasis en la intelectualidad, entonces entramos a tratar de hacer ese análisis un poco lógico, que no está desestimado, que es una forma también de acercarnos a la verdad, y la verdad es lógica pura, y justamente se detectan esas inconsistencias, pero en el proceso de sentir es la desintonización a la que estamos habituados. Claro, me doy cuenta que influyen mucho, y sí, lo que reconozco como avance es no sé si la palabra es apertura, este reconocimiento, ¿sí? el corazón abierto de alguna forma a sentir, porque yo veía que estaba pasando eso, no me detuve más que a sentir pero era impresionante, no podía coordinar la barbilla. Y a detectar de qué estaba hablando. Es todo lo que me pareció interesante. Eso también modifiqué un poco aprendiendo de Jesús. Cada vez porque justamente le ponía a la persona esta cuestión de importancia de no pasarnos a juzgar todo, como que hemos hecho todo mal, porque eso yo también lo estuve haciendo, incluso lo detecté ahora. Que, bueno, ahora, y decías vos en el grupo, la fachada de la tristeza no procesada y llorando, o sea, tampoco es mantener una emoción como una constante. Es como dice Jesús, hay momentos de intensidad que brota, que fluye y lo otro sigue, o sea, no es que uno abrumarse te inhabilita para la vida prácticamente. Pareciera que no se pudiera
Sí, bueno, lo
llevar
que
a cabo.
acabas de decir es una instancia, un caso de lo que acaba de él comentar acerca de usar el intelecto para detenerse e ir a las emociones. Es decir, me empieza a temblar la barbilla y entonces yo ya sé que si en ese momento no puedo, pues en otro momento me puedo poner a rezar en este sentido de decir, vale, ahí, ¿qué estaba yo diciendo? Voy a intentar acordarme más de la emoción, porque eso sería que empieza quizá a mostrarse un miedo más puro quizá o más directo de algo o más lejano, y ese uso del intelecto para decir, no, primero está el alma, que es la causa. Tenemos ahí las cosas. Primero el corazón, lo decíamos en la vía. Primero sentir y respiras en la barriga y ese tipo de cosas, y ahora lo veremos hacer en la segunda parte, que ahora vemos después de unos minutos. Veremos hacer ese ejercicio de simplemente, venga, respirar en la barriga, les dice unas cuantas cosas, y eso, primero corazón y ya está. O sea, primero el alma. Pues, ese uso del intelecto para observarse y detener en el marco
Exacto.
de la ley de atracción, causa-efecto y ira, que hemos visto que ya lo tenemos bastante completo. Sí.
Sí, esa apertura y esa curiosidad, recuperar un poco la curiosidad de ver lo que está pasando acá, que lo hablan justamente en lógicas, emociones y verdad, tomar en cuenta ese hecho y bueno, había todo un desarrollo muy interesante. A quienes estén escuchando, invitarlos a ver, porque realmente nos invitaba a la experimentación. Entonces, todo lo que sucede en esta pseudo ceguera que tenemos, poder tomarlo como una oportunidad. Sí, eso me pasó y es algo que no noté, por ejemplo, vine como un poco, me doy cuenta, ¿no? Que estamos con esa inercia y, como él dice, el entorno bastante fuerte, ¿no? Sí, no sé cómo decir la palabra, sí, condicionante sería la palabra, a poder mantener esa decisión y a que siga la valentía, porque básicamente se trata de eso. Atrevernos a llevar adelante, más desde un niño, sobre todo, así muy. Ayer, por ejemplo, para dar un ejemplo de todo lo que se mueve, que él decía esto, cuando uno está conectado y como uno se abre, me llama mi hijo, en un proceso que yo ya estaba personal mío, y me llama. Y yo decidí atender, y él me llama con un conflicto propio, pero en realidad, que ya lo hemos visto con la ley de atracción y en el de la ira también, vamos a ser capaces de digitar un montón de cuestiones para abortar el proceso nuestro, mío en este caso, de creer que, bueno, pero ahora es más importante esto, dejo esto para después, y es ese orden de prioridades que lo pude ver.
Sí.
Resulta interesante igual la
Sobre todo
conversación.
son muestras de falta de fe, que las tenemos todos, en que como estamos solos, por defecto, que va a ser una de las cosas que trate ahora, como no creemos emocionalmente en que hay un Dios y unos guías celestiales que nos cuidan y nos van a servir en el proceso de procesar, pues entonces eso, lo que tú dices, marcas ahí cualquier cosa y dices, no, esto primero, esto es más importante. Y eso son vivir en el miedo.
Sí, justificaciones, totalmente. y reconociendo que es como un poco no solo esto que decís, la falta de fe un poco, sino que una forma de sostener, o sea, entrar en una meseta con el miedo y hacer del miedo, ahora en este momento, por ejemplo, ya una constante, pero no atravesarlo, no esto que dice Jesús, bueno, sí voy a sentir, o sea, no intervengan para que de la forma para abortar el proceso, pero no, yo lo convertí incluso en una constante y me doy cuenta por la forma en que estoy viviendo, ya vale, ya detecto. Con la ira no, con la ira tengo un miedo más gordo todavía.
Bueno, y vamos a cerrar, si quieres, con Ana Pilar comentando algo parecido, si le ha surgido sobre estos temas, y ya seguimos en la siguiente. Ana Pilar, ¿quieres comentar sobre algún evento?
¿Algún evento puntual? No, yo toda la vida, hasta los 52 años, nunca quise sentir el miedo. Nunca quise sentir el miedo, nunca quise sentir el dolor, así que siempre tenía a mano cosas para evitar. Eso es lo único que me recuerda esto que vimos, escuchamos de AJ.
Sí, tan sencillo como eso, ¿no? Que todos los dolores se refieren a un miedo, por lo tanto nos vamos dando cuenta ahora de que en realidad estamos siempre evitando sentir el miedo como niños pequeños otra vez. Sí.
Eso nada más.
Muy bien, pues despediros del amado público y ahora descansamos y os propongo seguir. Muchas gracias.
Perfecto, gracias.
Gracias Iván, gracias Ana.
Gracias. Vale, sí. Vamos a parar la grabación.